The ultimatum, "If you don't like living with us, feel free to leave," hung in the air of my house, a gauntlet thrown down by my son-in-law Gavin, with such casual cruelty that it shattered the last of my patience. A final insult after 2 years of his rent-free residency where he'd systematically eroded my confidence and rewritten the narrative of my own life, painting himself as the benevolent caretaker and me as the forgetful, burdensome mother-in-law. That night, the hurt crystallized into a cold, hard resolve, and I retreated not in defeat, but to my late husband's study, where the mind of the senior accountant I once was booted up, and I began a meticulous cost-benefit analysis of their presence, the ledger's right column swiftly overflowing with the staggering financial subsidies, the psychological warfare of constant condescension, and the emotional toll of watching my daughter Jessica become a silent ghost in her own marriage. Armed with this forensic audit of my own misery, I consulted my old friend and lawyer Elias Vance, who fortified me with the law and a strategy, warning, "He will try to make you seem like the problem," a prediction that proved terrifyingly accurate when, after I began calmly and methodically packing their belongings into neat, labeled boxes, Gavin returned home, and upon seeing his life being carted away not in a fit of rage but with the cool precision of an executor, he made a panicked, performative 911 call, his voice trembling with feigned concern as he claimed I was having a psychotic breakdown. 11 minutes later, my quiet street was awash with the strobe of police and ambulance lights, and I found myself at the center of the scene he had orchestrated, facing down officers who had been primed to see a delusional old woman. But I met them not with hysterics but with the unassailable facts from my manila folder of evidence, the deed in my name, the utility bills I paid, and a doctor's letter confirming my robust mental health. Just as Gavin's lies were beginning to curdle in the air, my attorney Elias arrived like a seasoned chess master, and we presented our final damning piece of evidence, an audio recording from a discreet pen recorder that captured Gavin's shocking transition from bullying rage to syrupy, fraudulent panic during his 911 call, a masterpiece of manipulation that utterly exposed him. The officer's demeanor shifted from cautious concern to cold professionalism in an instant. The handcuffs clicked shut on Gavin's wrists for filing a false report, and he was led away. His empire of bluster collapsed, while my daughter Jessica, arriving home to this chaos, finally broke her long silence with a gut-wrenching sob and confessed her complicity, her testimony sealing his fate. In the heavy quiet that followed, Elias served Jessica with the formal 30-day eviction notice, and as she moved out in the subsequent weeks of strained silence, I began the slow reclamation of my home and my peace, leaving my favorite teacup wherever I pleased. The house now filled not with the oppressive weight of their presence but with a clean, sovereign silence where I could finally hear my own voice again. The books balanced, my life my own once more. Of course, here is a significantly expanded version of the story, delving deeper into the characters, the emotional landscape, and the aftermath, bringing it closer to the requested length. The air in my sunroom, my last true sanctuary, was still and warm, thick with the dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sun, and the lingering, comforting scent of old paper from the historical novel resting in my lap. The delicate porcelain of my favorite teacup, adorned with its pattern of blue forget-me-nots, a gift from my late husband Robert on our 25th anniversary, was warm against my palm. This simple ritual, this quiet hour with a book and a cup of Earl Grey, was a bulwark against the slow, insidious occupation of my own home. The peace was fragile, a soap bubble destined to pop. It did so with the sound of the front door opening and the confident, heavy-footed tread of my son-in-law, Gavin, returning early from his downtown meeting. I didn't need to look up to know the expression on his face. I could feel it, a change in the atmospheric pressure of the house. The ultimatum he had delivered a week ago, "If you don't like living with us, feel free to leave," had hung in the air between us ever since, a toxic cloud neither of us had acknowledged, a stalemate in our Cold War. I had given him my answer not with words but with action. The living room which he passed through to find me was now a landscape of brown cardboard boxes, a monument to my resolve, each one neatly labeled in my precise, accountant's script, Gavin office, Jessica art supplies, master bedroom linens. He appeared in the sunroom doorway, his silhouette blocking the light. He was a man of 45 who wore his years with an aggressive, practiced confidence that had always put my teeth on edge. Even on a casual afternoon, he was dressed for a boardroom, his shirt crisply ironed, his hair perfectly coiffed, a Rolex glinting on his wrist. He stood there, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me, and then doing a double-take at the scene in the living room behind him. For a glorious, fleeting moment, he was utterly speechless, his mind visibly struggling to compute the data his eyes were providing. This was not in his script. In the narrative he had constructed over the past 2 years, I was a supporting character, a slightly forgetful, often inconvenient presence in the story of his life. I was not the director. I was not supposed to change the set. What is this? The question was a low, dangerous growl, so different from the smooth, condescending baritone he usually used to explain the world to me. He took a step into the sunroom, his presence seeming to suck the oxygen from the space. What the hell do you think you're doing, Caroline? I took a final, deliberate sip of my tea, the familiar floral taste a comfort, and placed the cup and saucer down on the small glass table beside me. I met his gaze, my hand steady in my lap. I'm packing, Gavin, I said, my voice unnaturally calm, a flat lake reflecting a gathering storm. I can see that, he spat, his face flushing a mottled, angry red. He gestured wildly towards the boxes. Is this some kind of sick, passive-aggressive joke? Did you forget to take your medication this morning? The accusation of forgetfulness, his favorite and most insidious weapon, was out of its sheath so quickly. He wielded it constantly, a subtle campaign to frame me as a dithering old woman who needed his firm managerial hand. It's not a joke, I replied, ignoring the jab about my health. My mind has never been clearer. You gave me an ultimatum last week. You suggested rather forcefully that if I didn't like living with you, I should feel free to leave. I paused, letting the memory of his cruelty hang between us. I've given your suggestion considerable thought, and I've decided on a different solution, a more logical one. I've decided it would be better for everyone if you and Jessica were the ones to leave. I want my house back. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of my statement struck him with physical force. He stared at me as if I had started speaking in tongues. His jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before the rage returned, hotter and more frantic now, laced with a high-pitched note of panic. He was losing control, the one thing he could not abide. You can't do that, he shouted, the volume making me flinch despite my resolve. We live here. This is our home. You can't just throw us out on the street. He took another step closer, his larger frame crowding me, trying to intimidate me back into my assigned role. No, Gavin, I said, my voice hardening, the calm giving way to something colder, sharper. This is my home. You have been living here as my guests, a privilege you have abused to its absolute limit. You have not paid a penny in rent. You have spoken to me with relentless disrespect in my own kitchen, and you have systematically tried to make me feel like a stranger within these walls. That arrangement is now over. He loomed over me, his fists clenched. For a terrifying second, I thought he might hit me. I saw a flash of raw, uncontrolled violence in his eyes, a side of him I had only ever suspected. But Gavin's weapons were not physical. They were psychological, far more precise and damaging. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing into venomous slits, and I saw a new, ugly idea forming. Direct confrontation wasn't working, so he would change the game. He would escalate. He was going to make me the problem. Without another word, he spun on his heel and stormed into the kitchen, snatching his phone from his pocket. I could see his reflection in the dark glass of a picture frame, a distorted, furious caricature. His entire demeanor shifted. The rage vanished, replaced by a mask of manufactured, high-stakes panic. His voice, when he spoke to the 911 operator, was a performance worthy of an Oscar, trembling, high-pitched, filled with a desperate, feigned concern that turned my blood to ice. Yes, hello? I need help, he stammered, his voice cracking artfully. It's my mother-in-law, Carolyn Reed. I'm at her house. Our house. I think she's having some sort of breakdown. A complete psychotic episode. She's delusional. She's throwing things, packing boxes. She doesn't seem to know who I am. I'm worried she's a danger to herself. Please, you have to send someone. Police, an ambulance, anything. I'm really scared of what she might do. I sat perfectly still, my hand resting on the arm of my chair. My heart a frantic bird beating against my ribs. My lawyer Elias Vance had predicted this exact move. He will try to make you seem like the problem, he had warned. Asterisk, he will attempt to portray you as unstable, as incompetent. It's a classic manipulator's tactic. Asterisk, hearing the theory was one thing. Living the reality, hearing my own son-in-law so coolly and convincingly fabricate my madness, was another. He was not just trying to win an argument. He was trying to have me erased, carted off to a psychiatric ward so he could solidify his control over my house, my assets, the life Robert and I had built. The wait was excruciating. 11 minutes. I counted each one by the slow, deliberate sweep of the second hand on the grandfather clock in the hall. Then the distant wail of a siren growing steadily closer. A crescendo of impending doom. Flashing red and blue lights began to strobe through my living room windows, painting the familiar walls in frantic, surreal slashes of color. A police car, followed closely by an ambulance, pulled up to the curb. My quiet, tree-lined street was now a crime scene, and I was the star suspect. Gavin rushed to the door before they could even knock, flinging it open. He had composed his face into a mask of pure, unadulterated anguish. "Thank God you're here," he cried out, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "I'm so glad you came so quickly. She's inside. I don't know what to do." He met the 2 police officers and 2 paramedics on the walkway, launching into his well-rehearsed performance. I watched through the window as he gestured wildly, his voice a torrent of panicked, convincing lies. He was brilliant. He was weaving a narrative that was both dramatic and tragically plausible, using my age, my widowhood, every stereotype of the frail, elderly woman as a weapon. They entered my home, their presence immediately overwhelming the cozy space. The lead officer, a tall man with a weary face whose tag read Sergeant Miller, approached me slowly, his hands visible. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle, carefully modulated. "My name is Sergeant Miller. We've had a report that you might be in some distress. Are you okay?" Gavin hovered behind them, a silent, sorrowful Greek chorus, nodding sadly as if to say, "See? You have to handle her with kid gloves." "I am perfectly fine, officer," I replied, my voice steady. I did not get up. I did not wring my hands. "Ma'am," he continued, "your son-in-law, Mr. Thorne, is very worried about you. He said you've been a bit confused today, that you've been packing things up, that you're not quite yourself." The accusation, now delivered by a uniformed authority, hung in the air with an official, terrifying weight. One of the paramedics, a young woman with a kind face, took a step forward. "Ma'am, my name is Sarah. Is it okay if I take your blood pressure?" Sometimes when people feel confused, it's a medical thing. They were boxing me in with their kindness, their professionalism. They were following their training, treating me as a patient, a victim of a crisis, not as a rational actor. They were stripping me of my agency. Gavin saw his opening. "Caroline," he said softly, oozing false sincerity, "these people are here to help you. We're all just worried about you. Just let them do their job. Please." He was trying to manage me, to direct the narrative. This was the precipice. I looked from his smug, concerned face to the cautious faces of the first responders. They were ready for tears, for shouting, for a confused, rambling denial. They were not ready for an accountant. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Officers, paramedics," I began, and my voice was not the reedy, quavering tone of a confused old woman. It was the clear, steady, authoritative voice of a retired senior accountant who had commanded respect in boardrooms for 40 years. "I want to thank you for your prompt response. Your concern is noted. However, I must assure you that I am not having, Nor have I ever had a breakdown. The shift in my tone was immediate and palpable. I could see a flicker of surprise in Sergeant Miller's eyes. Gavin, sensing the loss of control, tried to interject. "Carolyn, darling, you're not making sense." I held up a hand, a sharp, decisive gesture that cut him off mid-sentence. "Gavin, please do not interrupt me while I am speaking to the officers." My voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. He recoiled, his mouth snapping shut. I turned back to Sergeant Miller. "To be perfectly clear, I am not delusional. I know exactly who I am. I am Carolyn Reed. I know exactly where I am. I am in my own home, and I know exactly what I am doing." I gestured to the boxes. "You are correct that I have been packing, but I have not been packing my own belongings. I have been packing the belongings of my son-in-law, Gavin Thorne, and my daughter, Jessica Thorne. I am quite calmly and rationally in the process of evicting them from my home." The word evicting landed like a gavel. It reframed the entire situation from a medical crisis to a legal dispute. "Ma'am," Sergeant Miller said, his tone more formal, the gentleness gone, "Mr. Thorne stated you were a danger to yourself." "I understand what he stated," I replied, my voice unwavering. "What he stated, however, was a malicious falsehood, a deliberate lie designed to use you as a weapon against me. He made that call not out of concern, but out of narcissistic rage because I informed him he had to leave the home they have been living in, completely rent-free, for the past 2 years. I let that detail sink in. Rent-free. I saw the other officer, a woman, raise an eyebrow almost imperceptibly. Fortunately, I continued, I am a great believer in documentation. I rose slowly and walked to my grandmother's antique secretary desk. From a neat stack, I retrieved a thick manila folder and placed it on the coffee table with a solid thud. Perhaps this will help clarify the situation. I talked him through it as he opened it. The first document is a notarized copy of the deed. As you will see, it is in my name and my late husband's name only. The next are utility and property tax bills for the past 6 months, all addressed to and paid by me. And finally, I said, my voice softening slightly, a letter from my physician, Dr. Amanda Evans, from my physical last week. She confirms I am in excellent physical and mental health and, to quote her, exhibits no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. This was the silver bullet. The third-party professional validation of my sanity. Sergeant Miller read the letter carefully. When he finished, he placed it back in the folder and looked up. His gaze was no longer on me. It was directed with a new hard intensity at Gavin. Just as he was about to speak, the front door opened again. A man stepped in, his presence immediately commanding the room. It was Elias Vance in an impeccably tailored gray suit, his silver hair neat, a leather briefcase in his hand. "Good afternoon, Sergeant," he said, his voice a rich, authoritative baritone. "I see I've arrived at an opportune moment. I am Elias Vance, Mrs. Reed's attorney." He strode to my side, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. The cavalry had arrived. The sergeant explained the situation, and Elias's gaze settled on Gavin, cold and sharp. "A mental health crisis?" he repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "It seems to me, Sergeant, that what we are actually witnessing is a malicious attempt to use emergency services to harass and intimidate a senior citizen, an offense that carries significant legal penalties." Gavin paled. The threat was now specific and real. Elias turned back to the officers. "My client contacted me last week about an escalating pattern of abuse from her son-in-law. I advised her that a man of his character might resort to precisely this kind of manipulative tactic. It seems my prediction was accurate." He had reframed the narrative in under a minute. I was the victim. Gavin was the perpetrator. Then Elias delivered the coup de grace. "I believe my client may have one final piece of evidence." He looked at me. I gave a small nod. He produced the silver pen recorder from his pocket. "My client has, on my advice, been making audio recordings. The file from this afternoon will be particularly illuminating." I retrieved the USB drive from my study, and the female officer took it to their patrol car. The wait was agonizing. Gavin stood frozen, a trapped animal. When the officer returned, her face was a mask of grim anger. She gave her sergeant a single damning nod. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around Gavin's wrists was a sound of absolute finality. As Sergeant Miller read him his rights, Gavin's eyes met mine, and they were filled with a pure, impotent hatred. He was led away, past the boxes that were the evidence of his downfall. In the stunned silence that followed, the front door opened one last time. It was my daughter Jessica, home from her conference. She took in the scene, the police, the boxes, my lawyer, my calm demeanor, and her face crumpled. "What's going on?" she whispered. It was the female officer who answered, her voice clinical. "Ma'am, your husband is under investigation for filing a false police report regarding your mother's mental state." Gavin from the doorway made one last pathetic grab for control. "Just tell them how confused she's been." But the spell was broken. Jessica looked at him, and for the first time, I saw not love or fear, but a clear, devastating disgust. "No," she wept, the word a raw, painful gasp. "He's lying. He's been awful to her for months. I just stood by and let it happen." Her confession, a torrent of guilt and truth, was the final nail in his coffin. Elias then served her with the formal legal eviction notice. The next 30 days were a quiet, painful ballet of departure. Jessica moved out, and a profound silence descended upon the house, a clean, sovereign silence. I reclaimed my space, my rituals, my life. I bought new, beautiful coasters just for the joy of it. I left my forget-me-not teacup wherever I pleased. The war was over. The books were balanced. The house was finally blessedly quiet, and in that quiet I could finally hear myself again.